Illinois. Mr. Garcia is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the glitch I had, but I want to thank you for holding this hearing and, of course, discussing this critical topic, and that is mass shootings in America. There have been over 340 mass shootings in 2022, and that number continues to climb. In the last 2 months, again, we've had 3 especially deadly mass shootings at a grocery store, at a school, and most recently at the 4th of July parade in my home state. We often see the devastating impacts of gun violence as it occurs on the news, but once the coverage dies down, communities are left to pick up the pieces and face the long-term outcomes. And as we address the horrifying consequences of mass shootings, we must also confront the challenges of other forms of gun violence that don't make the news. For decades, working class and minority neighborhoods have been subject to targeted economic discrimination, including redlining, predatory lending practices. Many shootings take place in these same systemically disadvantaged areas like the South and the West sides of Chicago, where there's been a lack of jobs and investment. So a question to our panelist, Mr. Broder, while limiting gun access, especially across access to weapons of war, is a vital and necessary and life-saving first step, we must also consider other factors that contribute to mass shootings and gun violence, like disinvestment from communities and access to mental health services. My question is, can you talk about the cycles of disinvestment and gun violence and how it keeps communities at risk?
Sure, thank you for the question. As I said, well, the first thing that should be noted is if we're talking about violence in general, it's one thing. We're talking about mass shooting. These are really random. It's incredibly hard to predict where it's going to be the next mass shooting. I've tried, the FBI has tried, so many people have tried. It's incredibly hard to predict where it's going to happen. It can happen mostly in urban areas, but other than that, it's going to be incredibly hard to figure out where it's going to happen. In terms of business cycles, in terms of, in general, the economy, could this lead to potentially more mass shooting if there's a recession? It could. But it's going to be very hard to try to prevent it because we don't know where it's going to happen. In terms of these perpetrators needing mental health support, 100%. The vast majority of them have a history of mental health illness that is documented. So it's not something that we learn exposed, but we learn that we knew, a doctor knew, the kid or the children or the adolescent, young adult actually was seeing a psychiatrist, for instance. This happens quite a lot. So this is one of the predictor, for sure, providing more healthcare to help, on average, the average young Americans who suffer with schizophrenia or mental health disease would be amazing, just for the sake of their mental health, but also potentially preventing mass shooting. When we think about what can we do to help financially communities that are struggling with crime, you know, if I think about Buffalo and Mayor Brown, this community just suffered a lot, and they're going to need financial support. And the thing that I find extremely frustrating is if you look at mass shootings, which are random and just happen somewhere, the consequences are permanent. And I like to think horizontally when I think about a problem, and the first thing that comes in mind is natural disasters. Natural disasters just occur once. It's random. It's going to hit somewhere. Think of like a hurricane. And when we look at the economic consequences of these disasters, usually they're not permanent. They're short run. And one of the big difference between natural disaster and mass shooting is when there's a mass shooting, there's no support for these communities. Financial support. They need financial support after a mass shooting. This is obvious. And this might help to alleviate some of the economic consequences. Of course, some of these communities need help even before mass shooting. But I'm not gonna lie, there's no way you can predict where it's gonna be the next mass shooting. We just don't know. And there's tons of communities that need help, those that suffer most from violent crime. And I would target these communities if we would have the funding, but in general, there's no way you can predict where it's going to happen next, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. It looks like my time has expired, so I yield back to the chair.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Talib, is now recognized for 5 minutes.